Welcome to the 100X Life Podcast, where we activate people who desire to live the words of Jesus and experience the abundant life he promises. I'm your host, Rob Dayton, and I hope this podcast inspires you to put in the work of following Jesus.
Now the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captives free.
Hey, 100X Lifers, welcome back to the podcast. I cannot believe we are almost landing the plane. We are on Word of Jesus 51. We are on day 57 of the challenge. Only 5 more days left. We're on Word of Jesus 51, which is be ready and dressed for service. I'm so excited about this word because it represents so much of what we do in life, and Jesus is so serious in this word that if we miss it, it's almost like we miss everything. So pay attention to this one. I wanted to, before I talked about this word, I want to just share a little bit about yesterday's word. I feel like I didn't do it justice. I was on the road. Nancy and I are now in Tahoe skiing. I'm doing the podcast from a parking lot at Diamond Peak. And I want to talk about being servant of all. I want to talk about being more practical. What does it practically look like to serve all? And I kind of went through the list, but I want to break it down a little bit more. That service, I would say primarily is going to be for your spouse. And there's a much higher calling for a man to serve his wife than a wife to serve his man. I know that a lot of people talk about the woman submitting to the man, which is challenging. But in Paul's estimation in Ephesians 5, Paul's saying that the man actually has to die for the woman, which is quite a bit of service. We're to look at our spouse as Christ looks at the church, and we're going to present her as spotless and pure. And I remember when my mind finally got that, and I put Nancy on a pedestal, in her words, and really loved her like I'd never loved before, and not being concerned about all the things before that I wanted to change. I would just serve. And then we got to serve each child. And I don't mean just the kids. I mean each child. We've got to take them away. We've got to be ready to engage with them at a moment's notice. We got to pay attention. We got to serve at work. And I want you to look at work as worship. Work is worship. So even if you're in the secular space, you're not in a kingdom exploit, you're in the secular space, work as though it is unto the Lord. That's biblical. And so think of not just your exchange for money, but that you're serving Jesus. You're serving the people that are there as Jesus asked you to serve them. Be a servant to all. With your money, you can be a great service to all. There's so many things you can do. As we've been talking about in the developing nation space, your $100 is going to go way further in that space. And then serving your neighbors. Have you thought about your neighbors? How close are you with your neighbors? You know, Nancy and I, we do a Christmas tree thing where we go out and buy a bunch of Christmas trees and we put them out in front of everyone's house, and everyone comes out and decorates them, sets them up. It's just a really cool thing for the neighbors. We have a Christmas party, and then we started doing Wine at 5 on Wednesdays once a month, gathering the neighbors to talk to them, to love them, to serve them. A neighbor wants me to do something, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there to serve them. And then what about just going throughout your day? You're going to run into so many people that you can serve. It can be very, very simple, but you got to be ready to serve them, and you've got to leave room in your schedule for service. I remember when I changed, I kind of was focusing on this probably mid-career at the city of Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara's buildings in the government are kind of spaced out, and there's walking between them, maybe 6 or 7 blocks, sometimes 2. But I was always running late. So when I ran into somebody or there was someone to serve, I didn't have the time to do it. So I shifted my schedule to leave with time to stop and talk, time to stop and serve. And that made all the difference, because now when I'm on my walk between buildings, I was looking for someone to serve. So being strategic about your day and building in time so you're not too busy is really important. Serve people that Jesus brings you, I think is a really good one. You know when Jesus brings somebody to you, it's pretty obvious when that happens. You're going to serve at your church, of course. Your church is going to ask you to do some service. And of course you should. That's a way to serve. And then you're going to serve the institutions that you're in relationship with, be that a school, be that a volunteer organization that you're passionate about it. You're going to serve there as well. And then I'll just say that you can serve in the grocery store. I'm always talking about everything in the kingdom can be practiced in the grocery store. There are so many people to serve in the grocery store. If you want to be a servant to all, practice grocery store lookouts for kingdom moments for when you can bless people. It's pretty awesome to practice serving there and cultivating your sight for seeing when someone does need service. Again, not being too busy. Okay. Well, let's shift to today's word. This is be dressed and ready to serve. And this is going to be to serve Jesus. The other one, be a service to all, is about serving everyone else. This is specifically about being dressed and ready to serve Jesus, but they are completely related. And I just would ask you, are you ready? Are you ready when Jesus calls? Are you ready for that moment? Do you feel like that moment could come at any time? Or are you kind of resting on your laurels and not really thinking about Jesus calling at any given time? And we're going to read the scripture and find out what that's about. But I would just say, in America in particular, it's really interesting when we were talking to Chad and I recited the African proverb that Americans have watches and Africans have time. That's a really good assessment of America. America is generally too busy. We're too consumed with our own lives to be ready to serve and answer when Jesus calls. And I don't want that to be you. We don't want that to be. So let's look at today's word. Today's word is going to be found in Luke 12:35. But I'm going to read a lot more. I'm going to read Luke 12:35 through 48. And I want you to know that this scripture can be taken as a second coming, and that's okay. I do believe it applies to that. But also listen to it as though it applies to today. Okay, here we go. So this is Luke, starting in 12:35. Be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit. Be like men who are waiting for their master when he returns from the wedding feast, so that they may immediately open the door to him when he comes and knocks. So this picture of Jesus, the master, coming from somewhere else, and the servants being ready, dressed and ready to serve him when he knocks on the door. Blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on the alert when he comes. Truly, I say to you, he will gird himself to serve and have them recline at the table and will come up and wait on them, whether he comes in the second watch or even in the third, and finds them. So blessed are those slaves. But be sure of this, and this is the warning, that if the head of a household had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have allowed his house to be broken into. In other words, in the context of this, if you're in the house and Jesus is coming knocking, you're not paying attention, the thief could come and actually come in and steal from you there. So he says, you too be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. Then, interesting, Peter says, Lord, are you addressing this parable to us or everyone else as well? Jesus doesn't answer him specifically, but gives him a clue that it's everyone. He says, who then is the faithful, sensible steward, whom his master will put in charge of his servants to give them their rations at the proper time? I love this. People who are their slaves, or they're slaves of the master, but they're also kind of head slaves, and they're really good at serving the other ones, giving them what they need at the proper time. Blessed is the slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. So when Jesus is knocking on the door and we're at that moment serving other people, we're active, we're guarding the house, we're active service, then it's going to be really good, because he says, truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that slave says in his heart, my master will be a long time in coming, and begins to beat the slaves, both men and women, and eat and drink and get drunk, the master of those slaves will come on the day when he does not expect him at an hour he does not know. He will cut him into pieces and assign him a place with all the unbelievers. Wow. And that slave who knew his master's will and did not get ready or act in accordance with his will receive many lashes. But the one who did not know it and committed deeds worthy of flogging will receive but few. From everyone who has been given, much will be required, and to whom they have entrusted much, of them they will be asked all the more. Okay, so let's break this down. I wanted to read the whole thing so you could get this picture of Jesus telling this parable to his disciples, but referencing anyone who can be ready. And again, many people teach this is the second coming. I do believe it can be the second coming. In other words, Jesus' return in the second coming and what he sees and finds in the second coming. I think that that's totally appropriate, but don't miss the fact that this is also about kingdom now. He's also talking about you being ready now. Jesus is showing up in our lives all the time in profound ways. He's inviting you to participate in his kingdom, and we must be ready. What does it mean to be practically ready? What does that mean? Well, first, I believe we need to be on alert. How many times in your life have you had a divine appointment, or knew that a spirit was asking you something, or to do something or to not do something? Being ready looks like self-awareness and belief that Jesus could at any moment ask me to do something or knock on my door, to stop for a friend, to stop for a stranger, stop for someone in need, or notice when your spouse really needs you or your kids need one-on-one time. Being dressed means that you're current with what Jesus is teaching you. I think this is really important. If we're dressed, it's like we are current. We understand we're in relationship with Jesus. We understand how he's growing us, where he's taking us. We're following him so we can understand where he's stretching us. That means we're going to be current with that. It probably means you met him just this morning. In other words, being ready means you've been in a relationship with him this morning with anticipation that today is going to be a God-guided experience, and you're ready. Being dressed and ready for service means being prepared for service at any moment's notice. Well, the book of Revelations is somewhat mysterious, and I included this in the book today, this passage out of Revelations 3:20, but I want to give the lead into it because although Revelations is very mysterious and it's hard to know what's symbolism and what's not, one thing is pretty clear, and that is Jesus's letters to the 7 angels of the 7 churches. And the worst letter is to the church of Laodicea, the Laodicean church, as it's so known. And what's crazy about this letter, and should be scary and a warning for us, is he said that they had become neutral in their participation in the kingdom, meaning they were neither hot or cold. It kind of reminds me of when I was in my ways and I wasn't practicing the ways of Jesus. I was very much like the Laodicean church, neither hot nor cold, and felt like I was going to be spit out of Jesus's mouth. It's like they no longer needed God. They had everything they needed. They were sufficient. They had wealth. So they weren't relying on him. And in America, we're consumed with our comfort and we're lulled into complacency. This Laodicean church sounds a lot like America, or could be like America. So that includes us. And that's why I think it's scary. Jesus calls the Laodicean church wretched, miserable, poor, and blind. And they don't even know it. They don't realize it. And I think this also is an accurate description of someone lagging in Jesus' third soil. In other words, when Jesus says that there's a plant, but thorns and thistles rise up, and it no longer has the capability of reproducing. They know Jesus. The Laodicean church is a church. They're following Jesus, or at least they say they are, but they've been lulled into complacency, and they're not dressed and ready. So what is Jesus' recommendation for those people? He says, clothe yourselves, which sounds very much like today's word of being dressed and ready for service. He tells them to heal their eyes, which sounds like regulate how you see. He asks them to repent, which means changing the way they think and be ready. And then we get to Revelation 3:20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man opens the door and lets me in, I will come and dine with him. Pretty amazing passage. And how many times, countless for me, I was taught that this verse refers to pre-Christians with Jesus knocking. In other words, and I've heard it so many times, Revelation 3:20 is about Jesus knocking on the heart of the pre-Christian. And it's used as a passage, an evangelical passage to let Jesus into your life. And that just is not true. The Laodicean church, they're Christians. They're people who say they follow Jesus. Revelation 3:20 is about us being ready for Jesus to knock. It's a message to us. We're to be ready for Jesus knocking. And are you ready? Are you ready for when he knocks? And are you ready to dine with Jesus, which is probably an even more profound thing? Knocking could be as simple as asking you to engage with a stranger or involved in serving the least of these, which Jesus also refers to him as himself. In other words, Jesus says, as you've served the least of these, you've also served me. Who's knocking on your door? If you look at the least of these, that could be Jesus knocking on your door there. And then when is Jesus going to be asking you to do something? I think that's what we really need to think about. Being dressed and ready to serve means that we at any moment are ready for Jesus to knock. We're prepared. We're looking. We've been with him. We know what he's teaching us. We know the word that we've been studying. So the enemy, we know when the enemy's coming to take away that word. We're kingdom aware, I think is what that is. Being dressed and ready is having a kingdom awareness, knowing that the king is going to ask us to do something at any moment. That is dressed and being ready to serve. So I hope that blesses you. Let's look at the 100X lifestyle, how one knows they're following this word. You recognize that your wealth has the power to deceive and deactivate your ability to grow Jesus's words in your heart. That is so crazy. We want to follow Jesus. We know so much of the scriptures, and then we just go on life busy and trying to comfort ourselves and feed ourselves and avoid inconvenience. And that status can deceive and deactivate our ability to grow Jesus' words in our hearts. The next one, you intentionally position yourself as if at any moment you will be asked, directed by Jesus to serve. I think we've nailed that one. So where do you find yourself in this word in the 100X life assessment? Are you just receiving this? I know for me, I'm continually refocusing and getting out of that third soil. I know all of this. I know what it looks like to have Jesus knock on me. I have had him come in and dine with me. It has been incredible. And it happens again and again and again. But we have to be ready. We have to be looking for him. We have to be listening for him. Is that Jesus? Is that him? Is that him over there? Is this person someone I'm supposed to connect with? You know, you can see how these relate with service. You're a servant to all and being dressed and ready to serve Jesus. So in the journaling this morning, ask the Father where you have responded well to serving the kingdom. Journal about his pride in you. This is a good moment to just really indulge in a moment where you really responded well and have the Father praise you and say, that was good. That was good. And then ask Jesus where he's been knocking in your life, but you have not answered. Jesus, is there a time you were knocking and I didn't answer? Could you make that apparent to me? And then saying, I don't want to do that again. I want to be ready for service. That's what we want to do. Guys, good job on the challenge. Way to go hanging in there. I love seeing your comments on the chat. all the transformation that's happened. Even the weight loss is amazing. The fact that people are going to the gym on a regular basis is amazing. And then living the words of Jesus. What a privilege it is to have a master that loves us so much and gives us so much opportunity to participate with him as stewards in his kingdom. We will see you tomorrow. If you believe in the 100X Life movement, please follow and invite a friend by sharing this podcast. The 100X Life movement could also be found on Instagram and Facebook, and also at 100xlife.com. The 100X Life podcast was produced by Jenna D of Jenna D Services with music by Ryan Ellis.
Lost, but you found me here, and your fire burns inside. It will not disappear, because the Spirit